All right, looking at intelligence and thinking about what makes us intelligent, or in some cases, not so intelligent. This is probably one of the most controversial areas of psychology. You see down there at the bottom, it says theory rich but data poor. The idea being that there are a lot of theories about intelligence and what intelligence is and how do we achieve it and then how do we measure it. But the data is really hard to get, because how do we measure intelligence? Because it can look very different amongst our society and our population. So what's the difference between achievement and intelligence? Achievement is what you know, what you can do, and then intelligence is what makes achievement possible. So then the question becomes, how do we define it? How do we measure that? And then there's this huge gaps between racial and ethnic groups having more or less of it, and then what accounts for those differences. And we're going to look at testing bias in this unit at the end as well. And I'll give you some examples of some tests that are very, you guys are really smart, but because you are not necessarily familiar with those concepts, you're going to have a hard time achieving on them. But we'll look at that, because again, it's, how do we define it, how do we measure it, and then how do we ensure that trying to think of the word I'm looking for. How do we make sure that we are accounting for the differences between different groups? So the definition of intelligence is the ability to learn from experience, to solve problems, use knowledge to adapt to new situations. It's socially constructed. Thus, it can be culturally specific. So intelligence might not be the same or look the same in one country as it does in another. According to this definition, are both Einstein and Babe Ruth intelligent? I would say yes, but maybe it's in their own field. So you could be very smart in one field, but not so smart in another. I talk all the time in class about how I'm math stupid, or learned helplessness there. But the idea is that, again, our intelligence is that ability to learn from experience, solve problems, use knowledge, our ability to be able to adapt to new situations. This has been a big debate. Is intelligence one thing, or is it several different things? So to find out, scientists use what's called factor analysis, a statistical procedure that identifies clusters of related items on a test. So Charles Spearman used factor analysis to develop he had a two-factor theory over 100 years ago. And your book talks about the idea of a G factor, which is general intelligence. So the idea is if you're good in one area, then you're going to be good in other areas as well. So factor analysis is the idea that if you take a test, like if you took an intelligence test, and then you cluster together, like say items 3, 5, and 9 kind of all go together, you cluster those items together. But what the G factor is the idea that you will be smart, or you'll be intelligent in multiple different areas, that you're not just intelligent in one area. You would be good in all different areas. And then S factor is your specific intelligence, that yes, are there going to be areas that you are better in than others? Absolutely. And so the G factor is the idea if you're good in one area, you're good in other areas as well. And then the S factor is just talking about the idea that you do have some specific intelligence, that you're going to be better in some areas than others. Thurston in 1941, he was probably one of Spearman's biggest opponents. He came up with this idea of 7 factors of intelligence. He said that we looked at space, numbers, verbal comprehension, verbal fluency, memory, reasoning, and perceptual speed. And is originally seen as separate, but further evidence shows that they are related. So he originally said these different 7 factors of intelligence are all different, and so you may have good spatial ability, but maybe not so much good verbal fluency. He's going to find out later, your book talks about the idea that after they run some tests, they actually find out that it's very much the idea that a lot of these cluster around each other. So if you're good at verbal comprehension, you're going to be good at reasoning. You also have J.P. Guilford, who had 120 factors of intelligence. He also adds to the mix the idea of creativity and imaginative thinking. But again, you're looking at this idea that you have a general level of intelligence, and then you start to kind of cluster together what you are better at, your S factor. So the drawback of some of these factor theories is that it's antiquated. The thoughts assumed if bright in one area, we're bright in everything. Today, we know that individuals may excel in one area and be deficient at others. If we can identify factors where students excel, we can mold the education to fit them. And I will say that that's kind of this big push in education, is the idea of kind of molding your education to what you're good at. That's one of the ideas of why you have iPads and why you have one-to-one classrooms, is because, technology enables teachers and schools to tailor what you are good at, tailor your education to benefit you. And so then the idea is that it increases self-esteem, it can help you select careers based on what you're good at. The factor theory also can explain how factors interact with each other. There's a lot of drawbacks to the idea of the factor theory, but again, that factor theory is just that you take a test, you cluster around certain areas that you're good at, your G factor. The numbers that you would score the highest on would be your S factor, those specific kind of things. But again, it's the idea that just assumes that if we're bright in one area, that we're going to be relatively bright in all of the others. And we just know that that's not true today. There's many cases of people who are very, very bright in one area, but may not necessarily excel in a school kind of environment. So Howard Gardner is like the guru education person. He disagreed with Spearman and others he came up with this idea of multiple intelligence. And we will look at Gardner's multiple intelligence and take some of those quizzes in class if you haven't already taken one. I have a feeling you have. He came up with the idea by studying savants. A savant is a condition where a person has limited mental ability but is exceptional in one area. If you've ever seen the movie, that's a picture from the movie Rain Man, and Rain Man is based on a true story, but he's a card player. He's very, very good at like counting cards, but he can't necessarily get himself dressed in the morning. I've taught kids who had accommodations, were lower on the IQ scale, who maybe weren't as intelligent, but they were, when it came to like one thing, I had one kid who was very into pipe organs, and he was brilliant. And when it came to pipe organs, that was his thing. Like, he could memorize it, and he knew the sounds, and he could pick up on it. So the idea is that, you have multiple intelligences. And so Gardner looked at, he said that these were the intelligences. And like I said, we'll look more at these in class and look at what kind of you have. But visual or spatial learners, you can be verbal or linguistic, logical, mathematical, bodily, kinesthetic, musical, rhythmic, interpersonal, intrapersonal, natural. Like, how you think about, and we'll talk about this in class, but how do you learn best? Do you learn best by, do you need to hear a song? Do you need you need something laid out for you? Do you need somebody to talk to you about it? Do you need to see pictures? Do you need to do it? Do you need to move around? And you can be more than one of these. So then Robert Steinberg had an idea of triarchic theory of intelligence, kind of simplified Gardner a little bit, and brought it down to 3. And he said that it was analytical, creative, and practical. Analytical were academic, problem solving, analyze, compare, evaluate. Creative, generating these novel ideas. Practical, required for everyday tasks. Multiple solutions exist, applying, using, doing. And he says, when he looks at it, he kind of gives this idea of, he gives the example of having 3 different students, one being good at the analytical, one being good at the practical, and one being good at the creative. And he says, well, that's great, but what you really want is you want somebody who has aspects of all 3 of those. That's really what that's what intelligence is. And he did a lot of studies where there's a picture of your book on page 611 of a little kid, he talks about street smarts, and it says the child selling candy on the streets of Manaus, Brazil, and developing practical intelligence at a very young age. He actually did some research with kids selling variety of different items, usually fruit, on the side of the street in Brazil and some other third world countries, and he talked about how they were able to make these deals, do this math in their head, head, sell these products, finagle people into buying this stuff. But then if they put them in a classroom setting, they couldn't do it. Like they would fail the test every time. So this idea is that you can be intellectual, you can be intelligent in multiple ways. But again, you can see here his triarchic theory model. Again, that intelligence has 3 parts. The analytic part enables us to solve problems. The creative part allows us to deal with new situations. And practical part, it makes it possible for us to perform those everyday tasks. And we are often using more of those simultaneously, like we use them at multiple different times. We also have EQ, which is emotional intelligence. It was first called social intelligence. It's our ability to perceive, express, and understand, and then regulate our emotions. No surprise here, I don't think, but women typically have a higher EQ than men do. Women are more perceptive. Some studies show that EQ to be a greater predictor for future success, actually, than IQ, that it's better to have a higher EQ, to be able to walk into a room, read the situation, understand what people are saying, where they're coming from, and then express that or either control their own emotions, is a huge factor in how successful we are in life. So EQ factors are things like self-awareness, recognizing our own feelings, mood management, being able to get out of a bad mood, self-motivation, move ahead, confidence, enthusiasm, even when things get you down, that you keep moving forward, impulse control, delay pleasure until task is complete. This is really hard, especially in this day and age when it's like, I want it, so I'm going to get it right now. Like we're used to like instant gratification, but the more that you can kind of control those impulses and delay pleasure until the task is over with, the better off you are. People skills, again, that ability to empathize, feel for other people, understand where other people are coming from, and then to be able to like communicate and cooperate with people. We call those a lot of times now, I know Ms. Stone, she teaches about soft skills. This is a lot of times these EQ factors are what we call soft skills, and it's what employees are looking for. And sometimes people who have really high IQ levels don't necessarily have high EQ levels, because again, the EQ levels come from being around multiple different people and being able to recognize those things. And so again, success, sometimes the people with higher EQ levels are actually more successful than people with high IQ levels. So is there a link between the size of your brain and intelligence? Maybe a small correlation between head size and intelligence scores, but it's also relative to your body size. So using an MRI, we found that there was a plus 0.44 correlation with brain size and IQ score, and I just think this is kind of an interesting graphic because brain size doesn't necessarily match performance, but you can see here how some people, Einstein, Jonathan Swift, how many grams their brain weighed, and so Albert Einstein had a brain that weighed 12,030 grams, which is slightly less than the average weight of a normal brain. And then Jonathan Swift, who wrote Gulliver's Travels, his brain was 2,000 grams, which is actually the largest on record. So it's kind of interesting just to see what people's brain, how brain size does it, bigger brains. But again, it doesn't necessarily match performance. Again here, normal brain weighs about 13,050 grams. The side view, you can see the wrinkle cortex. Again, that's our feeling, reading, moving. And then you see Einstein's brain weighed about 1,200 grams, which is slightly less. Einstein's brain was different in that it lacked the yellow area, which allowed his red area, the inferior parietal lobes, to be 15% wider. So what they think is that those red area, Einstein's larger inferior parietal lobe increased his ability to think and imagine such things as space being curved and that time could slow down. So it actually kind of benefited Einstein. Okay, so we're going to stop here for right now. So make sure that you've read modules 60 and 61 to go along with this. And I will see you guys in class. Make sure if you have any questions, you write them down and let me know.